In most cases, as examination will show, the evidence is so clear that little or no comment is necessary. Most of the evidence also points so much in one direction that the only verdict which seems reasonable is that the fairy faith belongs to a doctrine of souls. That is to say, that fairyland is a state or condition, realm or place, very much like, if not the same as, that wherein civilized and uncivilized men alike place the souls of the dead, in company with other invisible spirits, such as gods, daemons, and all sorts of good and bad spirits. Not only do both educated and uneducated Celtic seers so conceive fairyland, but they go much further and say that fairyland actually exists as an invisible world within which the visible world is immersed like an island in an unexplored ocean, and that it is peopled by more species of living beings than this world because incomparably more vast and varied in its possibilities. And a little bit farther, he says, let us then, for a time, forget that there are such things as libraries and universities, and betake ourselves to the Celtic peasant for instruction, living close to nature as he lives, and thinking the things which he thinks. Well, friends, it's Michael again. That was a little excerpt from W.Y. Evans Wentz' classic collection in his doctoral dissertation, as a matter of fact, uh, which you can find under the title "The Fairy Faith in Celtic Countries," which I think was 1911 or something like this. Yeah, 1911. Can you believe it? And in fact, I believe it was at Oxford, no less, where he undertook his dissertation. So, so there we are. And so today I wanted to talk relatively briefly about about the fairies. Now, I was gonna wanted to do this video outside, but the mosquitoes are really bad right now, which they're usually not bad at all where we live here in Michigan. But it's been an extraordinarily wet second half of summer and fall so far. So these are the late mosquitoes are out, and boy are they out here in the woods. Uh, so yeah, so so fairies. Um, you may believe in them, you may not believe in them, but I have been interested in the topic since I was a child, and certainly that has everything to do with my grandfather from Ireland telling us stories about fairies and banshees and so forth when we were kids. Um, Telling the story, one of the stories I remember he told is when he was coming home. He was probably 14 years old, 13, maybe 12, coming home at night. And he was supposed to be home by dark, and it was just getting dark, and he was walking, and he heard footsteps behind him, which is a common thing that happens in some of these tales. And he would speed up his cadence, and the steps behind him would speed up to match his, until he finally turned around and nobody was there, or at least he couldn't see anybody that was there. So yeah, so I've been interested ever since then, and as a young man, in my 20s, early 20s, um, I had an experience. And experience. You can read all the books in the world, right? This is what Evans once says in the last passage I read. Let's forget there are universities and libraries and just go to experience of the peasantry. Not that I was, well, I guess I was the peasantry at the time. Um, so here's my experience. So I was hanging around with a group of people. So it might have been mid 20s, might have been 24, 25, and wanted to have a kind of vision quest or something. My friend had went out to the woods this one for a weekend and just sat still basically. I think he was a big reader of Tom Brown, the tracker. And so he went to do that, and he recommended that I do it. Now, I didn't have a whole weekend to do it, but I figured I would do it for, you know, 4 or 5 hours. So I went to a state park in Michigan. I can't remember which one it was. And I went out to the woods, not far from a lake, and I just sat for a long time. It had to be at least 4 or 5 hours. And, nothing was happening other than hearing birds and stuff. But at one point, I was looking up into the trees, kind of like I am right now. And It was there were broadleaf trees, maybe maples, and I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me because it seemed like I saw the the crown of the trees kind of moving in a group where these little men, I guess we could call them. They weren't really men. I didn't think of them as men, but they were humanoid in shape. Um, kind of the kind of shape they were like made of sticks. I mean, the best thing I can describe it is if you've seen the Lord of the Rings movies with the Ents. They were kind of like that, and they moved very super slow, slower than in the film. And but I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me, and so I kind of blew it off until so maybe 5 7 years later. I was married by this time, and my wife and I think our three oldest were at the Michigan Renaissance Festival, and they had this character called the Green Man, and maybe you've seen them before. I had never seen one, and it was this some guy in a costume on stilts moving and and he was dressed like a tree basically, moving in a super slow motion. And when I saw that, I was kind of freaked out. And I write about this in my book, Sophia in Exile. And my wife said, "What is your problem?" I said, "I've seen this guy before." And I had never told her what happened. So I told her what I saw. Um, and I didn't think much about it other than that. But this certainly happened. And that kind of confirmed my experiences. Maybe I wasn't crazy. Maybe other people have seen a similar thing in this, what is called the Green Man. Because I guess if I would have expected to see fairies when I was 25 or how old it was, I would have probably expected more, you know, like you see in A Midsummer Night's Dream or something. But that's not what I saw. I saw something very strange. But I saw it with my physical eyes. I mean, I definitely saw it, but I was trying to talk myself into saying I didn't see it. So that's one example. Now, I have to say that in my family, a kind of psychic ability exists. My dad had it. He had it pretty profound, pretty strong. He didn't like it, but he had it. For him, it was usually seeing the dead. So I mean, he saw his own mother. He saw like his father-in-law after they'd passed. He also saw my uncle Kevin, who committed suicide when I was 33. So a couple of years later, my dad, I thought he saw him, and it wasn't him. Well, it probably was him, but it, he thought he saw somebody else at first, and so it was kind of an interesting thing. Anyway, so my dad had it, and so I have it to a degree, but I have tried not to get too involved with it. I mean, when I was in my 20s, I would try to develop it somewhat, but the thing is, if you develop psychic abilities like that, trying to get into the shade here, um, you open yourself to other things, and a lot of people you'll notice who work at their psychic development end up with cancer or other kinds of things because they open their bodies too much, I think. So it's nothing ever tried to develop too strongly after a kind of a flirtation in my 20s, but it's still there, right? And it kind of runs into families from what I can tell, because my daughter May, who's now 26, when she was little, she still has it pretty much. When she was little, say 3, I was at school. I was an older teacher at the time, and my older boys were with me because they were enrolled, but she wasn't old enough for school yet. And my wife was in the backyard. We lived in the suburbs of Detroit at the time, so my wife was in the backyard raking leaves. So it was probably October, and May was with her with her little pretend rake, little kid rakes you get. And Bonnie was raking, and May said, "Mom, stop." And she looked very concerned. And Bonnie said, "Well, what's the matter?" "Those people down there." Bonnie didn't see them, but May certainly did. And when I And so Bonnie stopped raking, just at least to humor May. But years later, we were at, I think it was Thanksgiving, and all the kids were home. So I was talking to them. I mentioned that to May. She said, "Yep, I saw those. I don't know why. I don't know who they were, but I saw them." So it's certainly something out there. But now here's the thing, though. So over the years, I have kind of a side hustle in reading about fairies and stuff like this, and um, you can see I have a shelf full of them. There's all kind, but I think Evans Wentz's book is the best one. But there's a book called Seeing Fairies out there, which is actually accounts collected by I can't remember the name of the woman over decades. People would send her accounts of seeing fairies, either something they were recalling from childhood or something that happened to them as adults. So it's a real thing, right? Now, unfortunately, um, some of the people who were most interested in accounts of fairies, especially in the early 20th century, or I'd say even through the mid 20th century, were theosophists. And I don't mean Jacob Burmian theosophists, I mean Blavatskyan theosophists. And they have a particular set of assumptions about what they think you're seeing, right? Um, that, perhaps ectoplasm is being taken out of the body of the observer, and the entities clothe themselves with it so they can be seen. I don't, they have a whole philosophy of it, I guess, or a science. They would call it science, probably. Um, and so a lot of the accounts in this book, Seeing Fairies, is one of them. Apparently, the woman wasn't a theosophist because her descriptions are, kind of filled with theosophical jargon. Um, so that's one. That's the bad news, right? But there are others that you can find. In fact, there's one you can look it up on the internet. It's called the Fairy Census. I can't remember the name of the guy who put it together, but it comes out every year, every 2 years, and it's huge. It's a PDF file the guy keeps adding to because people keep sending him accounts of fairy sightings and encounters. Um, so I mean, it's worth looking at. Now, here's the thing, right? People people, Western people, because post Enlightenment Western people tend to dismiss this, these sightings of fairies or nature spirits or whatever you want to call them, devas, as just the imagination of, uneducated bog trotters. Um, I don't think that's true because if we look at um, world history, every culture on Earth has some variety of this kind of being out there. I don't think they're just inventing stuff and reporting. I think, in a way, you can call it the natural science of the age. Now, a great example of this, someone who took them seriously before Evans Wentz, was Robert Kirk in his book The Secret Commonwealth, which came out in, I think it's 1690 or something. Uh, well, we don't know if it came out or not, but it was written in 1690 before he died, and you can get it actually a pretty cheap edition from Dover Press. I think it's less than $10 even. So, but he took it seriously too, and he was a reverend. He was, I think, a Presbyterian minister, and he took the accounts of his parishioners and the peasantry there seriously. He didn't treat them like they were stupid, because they weren't stupid. And he also gets into things like the second sight and other kinds of phenomena of the time that are related to the ability to see fairies. Um, so and yeah, and so that's one example. I mean, another time, and this one was a different kind of vision. So I saw what looked to be the Great Pan, right, in our woods. This is just last a year ago, about a little over a year ago, and he didn't look happy. I mean, he wasn't looking at me; he was looking kind of across our property to our neighbors, and I think he was warning me that something was going to happen with my neighbor, because something did happen. which would have which has since been ironed out. Um, but that was more of an imaginative vision. That was not like when I saw the little green men, or the little, literally little green men at the tops of the trees. That was definitely with my physical eyes. The other one with Pan, I think, was more of an imaginative vision. Um, Nonetheless, I mean, it's still. I think, I mean, if you've ever spent any time in the woods, and I spent a lot of time in the woods. There are those moments where you feel you're being watched. You feel that you're not there by yourself, for sure. And I thought that would be interesting for in the comments, for people to share their own experiences or thoughts about this topic, because I don't think you can discount it. And in fact, I'm kind of encouraged that David Bentley Hart kind of famously is a true believer in fairies. And I use one of his essays in my students, which was actually kind of a review essay of The Secret Commonwealth by Robert Kirk when it was republished a few years ago. John Milbank's another one. And I think you would have to be, profoundly arrogant to dismiss the accounts of generations and generations of humans on this planet about their experiences. But, we know this is common. In fact, the great Marxist critic E.F. Schumacher, was it not Schumacher, E.P. Thompson calls it the enormous condescension of posterity. Right? We always think we're so much wiser than everybody who came before us, and I don't know what our evidence is. yeah, yeah. What's your evidence? Strip malls and in the internet, right? That's your evidence for we're an advanced civilization. I don't think so. So anyway, I thought that we'd just do a short video today, just so I could introduce the topic and my own experiences, and that of my family. But I'd like to hear what your experiences are and what your thoughts are on the topic. So drop it down in the comments, and it would be wonderful to hear what you have to say, because I think it's an important topic, and I think the farther we get away from this idea of the secret commonwealth, what happens is we get entrapped into another uh, kind of diabolical fairyland called the internet. Of course, you're watching this internet, so I appreciate the irony, but you know how it is, right? You can get lost in a world, and there are so many stories of people getting lost in fairyland. And well, I think we should get lost in the real fairyland, and maybe take a break from the the aromatic fairyland of the internet sometimes, because I mean, fairies, I think, are like other beings of nature. they're not always helpful and good, right? But I also think that um, there's something there. There's something there, right? So talk to you next time.